Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this tutorial will show you how to paint this old country chapel on a 10 by 20 canvas. So this is one of those long canvases. It's a 10 by 20 size, and it's a stretched canvas, so it has the sides on it. And if you didn't want to do this on this size, you can do it on a different size, like a 11 by 14. This painting does require a traceable, although the chapel itself is a really simple drawing that you can do, but I will be using my traceable for this tutorial. And so we're not going to use the traceable yet. We're going to paint the background of this first, and the background consists of sky and ground. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure 4 inches from the bottom of the canvas, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line. So that horizontal line is going to divide where the sky is and where the ground is. There's a lot of sky in this painting because it's a really tall chapel that takes up the majority of the composition of the painting. So we're going to do the sky first, and I loaded my palette with bright aqua green and titanium white. So it's going to be a mixture of those two colors, and I'll be using this large brush. If you don't have a large brush like this, I think this is a 2-inch base coat brush, but the reason why I'm using a large brush is because there's a lot of canvas to cover, and I dipped it in the water and kind of tapped it out, but I kind of want to leave the water on that so our paint can get nice and thin. So this is going to be a nice thin layer of the blue and the white. So I loaded the brush in both of those colors, the blue and the white, and I'm just going to go ahead and apply it to the canvas. And so the blue and the white's kind of blending together itself to create a much lighter version of that aqua green color. And so that's the top of our canvas. So we're starting at the top, and we're just going to do horizontal strokes, and it goes pretty fast with this large brush. It goes pretty fast because the brush is nice and large and it's applying paint super fast. But what we want to do is we want to have the blue get sort of lighter as it goes down. So the top part is kind of slightly darker, and then it gradually blends to kind of a lighter blue to an almost white at the very bottom. It doesn't have to be a perfect gradient blend. In fact, I think it looks kind of nice when it's not perfect, when you have streaks of white and blue in there. Kind of makes it look like there's some clouds or some high sky clouds in the sky. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but just take your brush and just gently blend that blue and the white using all horizontal strokes. And because I'm filming this painting, I'll be turning the painting to its side a lot because it's that long form 10 by 20. And you can certainly turn your painting to the side like this too if it's helpful for you. So just continue to add that blue and white combination. Remember, this is a really thin layer of paint. The paint has been thinned out because there was water on the brush to begin with. If you feel like you need to dip your brush in a little bit more water, you can. And also if you need to reload your colors on your palette, you can. So the bottom part of the sky right above the horizon line is super light, almost all the way white. So a super light blue in that area. And go ahead and press pause if I'm going too fast for you so you can catch up and be ready for the next step. So the next step of this painting includes painting the grass area, and the grass is green. There's 2 different greens in this, plus titanium white. I used the color Hooker's Green Hue Permanent, brilliant yellow green, and then of course the titanium white. I'm going to set my big brush aside. I won't be using the big brush anymore. I'll be using the 3/4 flat for this, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this really pretty spring green on my palette. So I'm going to load the darker green, the lighter green, and also freshen up some of that white if you need to. Actually, you probably should because that white is blended with that turquoise. So a nice little fresh area of white. And use any brush. I like to just grab one of my bright brushes to blend the colors. So it doesn't really matter what brush you use to mix the colors on the palette. But we're going to mix a shade of green that's slightly darker than that brilliant yellow green. So I grabbed a small amount of that darker green, a little bit more of the brighter green, and then a little bit of white in there. And then I'm just going to gradually add little small amounts of the darker green to make this brilliant yellow green about 3 shades darker. And it really doesn't have to be exact. A little bit of water on my brush, distribute it into the paint to get it to thin out a bit. So that's kind of the shade that I'm going for. And then I'm just going to take that color and I'm going to apply it to the bottom area of the canvas. And I'm not going to be using the big flat brush because it's a little bit too big for that area. I grabbed my 3/4 flat and I'm just mixing that color again real quick on the palette. And I'm just applying it to the bottom area of the grass. And so this grass is actually going to get slightly lighter as it goes up. So the lightest part of our painting is right there along the horizon line. So it's darker on the bottom and lighter towards the horizon line. It's kind of opposite of the sky. I'm just doing left and right horizontal strokes all across the canvas. Then as you work your way up, grab small amounts of the white in there and let it kind of blend on the canvas. And in fact, I'm actually going to do it this way. I'm going to grab the white and decide what my lightest green is going to look like right there under the horizon line. And then I'm going to go ahead and have that color go down and it's going to eventually blend and meet with the darker green. So it doesn't have to be a perfect gradient blend. It's a grassy area. We'll have darker areas and lighter areas in different spots. So it doesn't have to be a perfect gradient. Just get it to be slightly lighter at the top and slightly darker at the bottom. And it gives your little landscape area a little bit of depth. Again, it's a very thin layer. The paint is not very thick. It was thinned down with a little bit of water. Pretty much the same kind of thinness as the sky was. And a little bit of dark at the bottom. Just brushing over it gently. You don't want to press too hard on your brush. You want to just gently brush over it. And the colors will blend themselves right onto the canvas. When you're done with this step, you'll need to let this entire painting dry. You can use a hair dryer to dry it real quick, or you could take a break and come back. I took a break and came back and I'm ready. So I mentioned that I will be using my Traceable for this. I won't be drawing it for you. But it is a really easy, simple drawing if you didn't want to print it out and use it. If you're going to draw it, you could just get a pencil and kind of lightly draw it. But the position of it is important. It's resting right there along the horizon line. So you don't want it to be floating in the sky and you don't want it to be overlapping the grass. It's got to be right there, right along that line of the horizon line. And so this gray paper thing is actually transfer paper. So I placed that shiny side down. And so I'm just making sure it's still lined up right there along that horizon line. And I'm just going to carefully draw over all of the lines and the windows and everything. So when you're done, you have your chapel drawing on the canvas, and you could go back over it and make it darker if you want, but I didn't do that to all the lines. I just did it a little bit on the window right there. And the next step is basically to add our first coat of paint to the chapel. So the colors I used are titanium white and Mars black. So load those two colors into your palette. I used a 3/4 inch flat wash brush, and I know that video kind of jumped around a little bit right there. But basically, you're going to load your 3/4 wash into the water, pat it dry, load it into the white, and we're just going to paint our chapel using all up and down strokes, or if you're doing your painting sideways, like I am now, horizontal strokes. But you want your strokes to go all in that vertical direction of the chapel. And when you get to the roof sort of area, you can paint diagonally. That's okay. So this layer is super thin. In fact, we can still see that blue showing through, and that's okay. It's kind of the base undercoat of the chapel. So kind of like we're priming it. And I'm basically just doing up and down strokes to all of it. So I'm on the outer part of it. I did that front entrance area first. You don't want to lose the shape of it. So when you kind of go around that front entrance area, you can leave kind of a little bit of a gap in there so you can see your lines. It's up to you if you want to paint around your windows or over your windows. In fact, it might be easiest just to paint over the windows. And because it's so thin, you could still kind of see the drawing through the window. So that's okay. And you're just doing vertical strokes, except for where you do so like right here, I did a circle around that rosette window, and just to kind of define that circle area. But then right here where the roof is, you could do vertical strokes just to make sure your shape is nice and defined. And then for the rest of the area, try to get everything going vertically. To make our chapel look a little old and rustic, we are going to use that Mars Black to kind of make a gray. So I dipped the tip of my brush in a tiny bit of Mars Black, and I kind of dragged it out on the palette a little bit. And so I'm just going to take that, and I'm actually going to use the tip of it to define that roof area before it gets lost in the painting. But you're just taking that white with a little bit of a black in it, and you're just gently dragging it down kind of towards the top of that roof area. I'm going to switch brushes here because that 3/4 flat is too wide for this technique. So this is the 12 bright brush. So it's just a smaller flat brush. And I'm just taking that white with the teeny bit of black, and I'm just kind of quickly sort of dragging it down, almost like dry brush style. If you wanted to do dry brush style and load your paint and then kind of wipe it off with a towel, that'll give you that same technique too. But I'm kind of doing this all throughout, but mostly emphasizing the top areas just under the roof with a little bit more of the darker gray than the rest. And so like up here, a little bit more darker gray because it's sort of under the roof. It might be casting a shadow in that area. And then the rest of it still gets that light gray. But we're not coloring the church gray. We're blending that black and white to create this streaky look of the gray, and that's creating that sort of rustic look. So again, on this rough area, I'm taking that gray, dragging down vertically. You just want to make sure that you're keeping that vertical nature of your stroke. So we're not going diagonally or horizontally. Sometimes it's kind of hard. You kind of get a straight and you realize your strokes are going diagonally. So you want to really push yourself to make sure your strokes are staying vertical. And then we're going around that rosette window, emphasizing a little bit more gray at the top area, but the rest of the chapel does get some streaks of gray in there as well. And then if you realize that, oh, maybe there's too much gray in there, or I did too much black, just load your brush with more of the white, and it will lighten it up some more. So you can always rinse your brush off and dry it and make sure you load more white on it. So I'm just taking this, and this is kind of like my second coat of paint here because that first layer was super thin and white. So I'm just loading my brush in a little bit more white. There's still a little bit of gray on my brush too, so it's not a pure white that I'm painting. There's little bits of gray in there, but I'm just making sure I have coverage so none of the blue from the sky is showing through. And it's okay to paint diagonally above the roof. That's okay. We just want to make sure we don't have any blue showing unless it's blue through the window. So I'm just going to continue this technique, painting up and down strokes. Notice that the front sort of entrance area, the bottom part of the roof area is slightly darker. I did that on purpose so that area would stand out a little bit more from the rest of the chapel. So if you wanted to do that too, you can. You could actually also do it the opposite if you wanted it to be lighter than the rest of the area, but it just helps it stand out. And I'm just slightly adding some more vertical lines in there. I'm making it a little bit darker, but actually I ended up making it lighter after that. So when it gets too dark, you can always just go back and add more white. And then I'm just doing a few more strokes of that gray on the rest of the chapel area. Then I'm just going to go ahead and do the top part of our chapel. So I didn't forget about that part yet. I just didn't do it yet. So starting with the white, adding a layer of white first, and then I'll be doing the same technique of adding a few strokes of gray over it so that it gives it that old chapel rustic look. When you're done and happy with your chapel colored all painted in, we're going to go ahead and get a round brush and do the roof lines. So I decided that I wanted a little bit of red into these lines. So I started with the Mars Black, but then I have Naphthol Crimson on my palette too. So my brush is pretty much double loaded in the black and the red. So the little pop of red in there kind of gives it a nice touch. But you're just basically painting the triangular roof lines on your chapel. And then I also outline very, very slightly. You see how thinner that line is compared to the roof line? Very, very light hand using just the tip of that round brush gives it a very thin, loose line. But outlining those vertical lines kind of helps define the shape of that front area. And then I'm doing the larger roof. If you find that your black is not flowing as much, you can add a bit of water in there, and that really helps with the flow of the round brush. Your line doesn't have to be consistent or perfect. In fact, the kind of the style of this painting is imperfect and loose and sort of abstract. So don't be afraid to just kind of relax with this. Your lines don't have to be even, and it gives the chapel more character when your lines are not so perfect. And then, so we'll do the top part of the roof. This one's slightly thinner as far as the thickness of the line. Then I'm going to go and very, very gently outline the vertical lines on these sides of the main part of the chapel, so the largest part of the building. Again, very loosely. It doesn't have to stay consistent, and it can go astray a little bit like that line did, and just go all the way down. And then you can go ahead and do the top part as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint the cross at the very top of the chapel. And that is it for that step. The next step I'm going to show you or demonstrate is the painting of the stained glass windows. So this is my favorite part of the painting. I love the effect the little stained glass little paint marks give, but I used a lot of colors in this. So this is darker turquoise. I think it's called Turquoise Blue. It's by Liquitex, so it's like a darker version of that aqua green. This one is Dioxazine Purple, and then I used Quinacridone Magenta. I used Cad Yellow Medium. So you can use your own choices of colors. If you don't want to use all those colors, if you wanted to simplify the palette, you can. I tend to be very colorful in my paintings, so it's harder for me to simplify palettes. But before I do the windows, I want to make sure that my windows are actually defined. So I'm just getting my pencil and I'm drawing them again, because when I painted, it kind of covered up the window. So I'm just taking my pencil and redrawing it. That way, when I do the stained glass, I know that where to fill it in. So there's my two windows that I just went ahead and repainted. So do the same. If you painted over your windows, you definitely want to redraw them so you know what you're doing. So when you do your paint marks, they're just little tiny dashed lines. I'm making them go kind of vertical, but if you wanted them to really go in any direction, you can. They're not really forming any kind of shape or noticeable object. It's just a bunch of little stipple paint dots all over the window. And so I did one color at a time, and then you go on, you wipe your brush or rinse it off, and go on to the next color and make more of those dots. One interesting effect that you can do with this is if you load it in some titanium white, the white gives it kind of a different color tint to it, but kind of makes the stained glass look like it's kind of reflecting in that area. And then you just fill it up and go on to the next color. So it's just really kind of random. You don't have to make it look like anything, as I mentioned earlier, and just kind of relax and have fun with this step. I'm going to be real careful here going to the yellow, because I did all cool colors and now I have a warm color in here. But with that, if that yellow starts mixing with some of the purples, it might make my stained glass window look kind of muddy. So I'm just gently applying it to just the areas where there's some open white spots. But I like the effect the yellow gives. It gives it a little bit of, I guess, going from all cool colors, and there's just some pops of yellow in there. Makes it look kind of pretty. And that's what I'm doing there with the yellow. I'm going to paint the door next. So you can do the door any color, but I decided to make kind of a light sort of peach color. And to do that, grab a little bit of yellow, a little bit of that Naphthol Crimson, and a whole bunch of white. I got to reload some more white. So the yellow and the Naphthol Crimson makes kind of an orangey color, but when you add the white to it, it'll make it kind of a light sort of peach color. And then I'm just going to take that and I'm going to go ahead and do the door. So up and down strokes for the door. Make sure the up and down strokes kind of matches the rest of the chapel because everything else is going up and down. I'm just outlining the shape of the door and I'm going to fill it in solid with that color. The next thing I'm going to do is outline the windows. So back to, or still that number 4 round brush, slightly water down some black. You want to kind of twist your brush as you're loading it, and that'll get all that paint to be right there on the tip of your brush. And then you want to just go ahead and outline your window shapes. So I'm just using my round brush to very loosely outline the shape of all the windows. So this window has kind of a curved but pointed top. And then go ahead and outline the door and the vertical line on the middle part of the door and the little dots for the doorknob. Next, I'm actually going to take my brush. There's still black on my brush. I'm going to slightly outline the bottom of the church. I'm going to wipe it off and I'm going to do this dry brush thing. When you wipe your paint off the brush, it's called dry brush stroke. And I'm just going to gently add some horizontal lines just under the chapel and probably under the horizon line itself too, just to give it some indication that there's shadow in that area. I know there's going to be some shrubs in that area, so I went ahead and add the dry brush stroke all along the horizon line. So super simple, just a few strokes, and I left it open under the door. I didn't do that under the door because there's going to be a path in that area. I'll be demonstrating the path next, and the path was done with the color Raw Sienna and Titanium White, so that's what I'm loading onto my palette right now. And then I'll be using a flat brush to do this technique. So this is the 12 bright brush. I'm going to double load the Raw Sienna and the Titanium White with the brush. So this path is a little bit wider at the bottom and it goes kind of narrow as it reaches the door. So I'm just taking the two colors and mixing them together. It's going to make a lighter Raw Sienna color. And then I'm going to start just under the door. It should be a really light brown. And I'm not trying to make it 100% solid. I want it to be, so it's going to get wider so that because of the distance thing, it's bigger on the bottom and smaller in the back. But left and right strokes, very, very lightly, gently, left and right. I am not pressing hard at all with the brush. I'm pressing very lightly, doing very loose left and right strokes. And I want it to be a little bit larger on the bottom. And it's pretty much the same color consistency throughout. If you wanted it to be lighter, you can add a little bit more white in there. I'm going to add a little bit of the raw sienna right there on the bottom to make it slightly darker on the bottom. And I'm just gently blending left and right strokes. You don't need to cover all that green. In fact, it looks really nice when some of that green is showing through. It makes it look like kind of an older looking path. And I'm bringing some of the strokes outwards so that they cover some of the green on the edges. But that's it for the path. And we're going to go ahead and do some of the shrubbery that's next to our chapel. So I'm going to load some fresh Hooker's Green Hue Permanent onto my palette. I'm still going to be using this number 12 bright brush, and I'm going to load my brush probably in, I'm going to freshen up some of the brilliant yellow green too. So I'll be using both that lighter green and darker green, and I'll load it in both of those colors. So about equal amounts of both of those colors. Doesn't have to be exact. You can make whatever shade of green you want to use here. And then I'm just going to gently tap my brush and make an abstract looking plant or something that's growing way in the distance. And I'm going to make it kind of slightly darker at the bottom and slightly lighter at the top. If you want your green to look a little bit more natural, you can add a teeny bit of red into it. That kind of makes your green look more like of a warm green. So if you wanted to do that, you can. And then this bush, doing kind of the same concept, just tapping the brush very loosely and creating the shape of the bush. Next, I'll be demonstrating the cotton bolls in this painting, and I did that with a round brush, so the number 4 round brush and titanium white. And these are really simple, loose, sort of, they're like little cotton boll flowers. And I'm just doing little dots on the bottom, and the dots are going to slightly get smaller as they go up. And they're just going to be little faint dots that kind of go up, and so the bottom ones are larger, the top ones are smaller. And I'm just going to do that on both sides of the path. So you can see in this area, I'm just painting little dots and they kind of fade away off into the distance. And then same exact thing on the other side. Cotton balls have, they're rounded, but they have kind of that shape, that cotton sort of shape. So I'm just going in there and kind of making them more abstract shaped, if that makes sense. So they're not all exactly circles, they're just kind of organic. Next, I'll be demonstrating how to paint the sun, and the sun was done with the number 4 round brush, my finger, and cad yellow medium and titanium white. So you want to start off by mixing a little bit of white into your cad yellow medium color, and you got your round brush. And so we're just going to paint a circle wherever you want your sun to be. My sun is in the upper right corner sort of area, so I just painted a circle. And then I'm actually just going to take my finger and load it into some white, and I'm going to take that white and kind of blend it more into that yellow, so that makes it nice and opaque. So sometimes when you use your finger, it lets the paint spread better the way you want it to versus the brush. And then, so there's my sun. And then I love the rays in this painting. I love the symbolism that the rays give off. But I'll be doing the rays dry brush style. And you can do it with that round brush, but I actually found the 12 bright brush to be more effective for the rays. So you load your bright brush into the white, mostly white, a little pop of yellow if you want some yellow in your rays. And you wipe it off with the towel. And then you gently stroke your brush. So you're not pressing hard at all. You're very, very lightly holding that brush. Just barely, it's barely kissing the canvas. It's just, it should not be super opaque. It should be very translucent, very loose and feathery. And to create that effect, because you wiped the paint off, or because there's tiny bits of paint on your brush. So I'm just taking that and doing the rays kind of all around the sun, but mostly to where they're kind of hitting that chapel there. So again, wipe off your brush, take it and drag it to create that effect. So right here, I'm just taking my number 4 round brush and I'm just going to kind of paint very subtle circular strokes around the sun. The next step I'm going to do is the frames on the window. So I'm going to freshen up some titanium white. I'm still using my number 4 round brush. I'm going to start with the rosette window and I'm going to do 5 petals, petal shapes in the window. So there's 2 and they're just like a little cat eye shape. They go to sort of a, not really a point, I guess they're kind of curved, but they start in the middle and you go to the circle. And so there's 3 at the top and these 2, we're going to fit 2 more at the bottom. And then the other windows have kind of a Y sort of shape. There's a vertical line in the middle and then the top 2 lines kind of go in the direction like the letter Y. I'll be demonstrating the cypress tree next, and that tree was done with some darker greens, so that hooker's green hue permanent. And before I do this cypress tree demonstration, I'm actually going to draw it in first. So drawing the shape of the tree is helpful so we kind of know what we're doing here. So I'm going to just grab my pencil and I'm going to lightly draw that sort of conical shape of that tree. So it's long and vertical. And the base of it is kind of in front of the chapel, so lower than the chapel, and it's a wavy line and it kind of goes to a point. And then this is just the hooker's green hue permanent on my brush. And I can work with some of the other greens as well. So you can grab some of that lighter green on your palette if you want. If you want it to be even darker, you can grab like a teeny bit of black if you want. Or you can grab a teeny bit of red and mix the red with that green, and that'll make it look kind of darker. But very loose strokes, little circular strokes to give it some texture. I'm painting in little tiny circles, and I'm just filling in the shape of that cypress tree. And going to go all the way up. So little loose circular strokes. Again, this is that number 4 round brush. And then if you want your colors to be lighter, I'm actually going to make my colors slightly lighter at the top because perhaps that's where the light would be hitting it, and then slightly darker at the bottom. You can even grab some yellow in there if you want to add some yellow shades of green in there if you want it to be more of a yellow green. And just have fun and kind of make your green sort of varied in different areas, darker on the bottom, kind of darker on the left, but lighter on the top and the right. little bit of black for the trunk of the tree. And then you could add that little bit of black right there on the bottom to give it a little bit of a shadow area at the bottom. And then go ahead and wipe your brush off and do a shadow. Few little horizontal dry brush strokes right under the tree. Gives it a little bit of a shadow. You don't have to go crazy or anything. Just very subtle horizontal strokes right there under the tree. The last thing I'm going to demonstrate is the stems of the cotton boll. So mix black and green together to where it's a very dark green. And this is the number 4 round brush, so I'm just using the very tip of my brush to paint the stem and then like 3 little prongs on the base of not all the cotton bolls, but some of them. And you don't want to do it on all of them because then it would look way too busy, but just a few here and there to make it look like they have the little stems. And then do it on both sides. And then I took that darker green and added that darker green to this bush in the back. So I'll be doing a few little extra touch-ups to this painting, but pretty much it's coming to its conclusion. One thing I wanted to point out was if you wanted to do like a Bible verse or a quote in the sky, I left that area, the upper left area, blank so that you can do that. If you wanted to get like a paint pen and write in that area. So that would be kind of a fun little element that you can add to the painting. I'm just taking the black and kind of darkening my doorknobs there a little bit. And I thought that it would pop a little bit better if I took this black and outlined the middle part of my window frame. So that's just doing that with the little black. It kind of helps that rosette formation sort of pop a little bit better. And then I did that on the other windows as well. And then I took my white and I added a little bit of white on the roof on the right side, just with the round brush, the number 4 round brush. So if the sun was hitting the chapel, there'd be a little bit more white sort of reflecting in this area. So I'm just adding the white on the roof side in that area. And that is it, my friends. This painting tutorial is coming to its conclusion. I'm signing my name down here with a 10-0 round brush and some black. So you can sign your name anywhere you want. But don't forget to sign your name, show it off. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed painting the old country chapel with me. Thanks for watching.